In September 1995, Jack Riley was living what many would consider an ordinary working-class life in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan. At 34, he had maintained steady employment as a welder at the Ford River Rouge complex for 8 years, demonstrating reliability that earned him respect among his colleagues. His position provided a stable middle-class income, enough to support his small family in their modest suburban home in Warren. Jack's wife, Mary Riley, a 32-year-old elementary school secretary, had endured 2 devastating miscarriages in the past 2 years. The first loss occurred in 1993, at 16 weeks into the pregnancy. The second followed in 1994, at 12 weeks. The couple's daily interactions had become mechanical, limited to necessary exchanges about household matters. Each evening followed the same pattern: a quiet dinner, after which Mary would retreat to their bedroom, leaving Jack alone with the television and his thoughts. The routine remained unbroken until Thursday, September 14, 1995. That evening, Detroit experienced an unusually severe autumn storm. The National Weather Service recorded rainfall exceeding 2 inches, accompanied by strong winds and periodic thunder. Through the rain-streaked windows, he spotted 2 teenage girls attempting to hitchhike. They were later identified as Amber Hart, 16, and Olivia Lester, 17, both students at Warren Woods Tower High School. Surveillance footage from the supermarket's security system would later show Riley's Ford Taurus slowing to a stop beside them at 6:17 p.m. The teenagers approached his vehicle, seeking refuge from the storm. Amber Hart, the younger of the two, explained they needed to reach Oak Street, a residential area approximately 2 miles away. Both girls wore their school backpacks, lending credibility to their story of trying to get home. Jack Riley, perhaps thinking of the children he and Mary had lost, made what would prove to be a life-altering decision to offer them a ride. The security footage captured their entry into his vehicle at 6:19 p.m. This would be the last time Amber Hart and Olivia Lester were seen alive. What transpired in the following hours would become the subject of intense police investigation and ultimately lead to one of Detroit's most controversial criminal cases. 48 hours later, on Saturday morning, the grim discovery was made. A maintenance worker conducting routine checks found 2 bodies in an abandoned storage facility along Grosbeck Highway. The victims were quickly identified as the missing teenagers through dental records. The Wayne County Medical Examiner's detailed report documented multiple injuries consistent with assault, concluding that both girls died from strangulation. The time of death was estimated between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Thursday evening. Detective Richard Hawk, a seasoned investigator with the Detroit Police Department's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. Known for his impressive track record of solved homicides, Hawk immediately recognized the high-profile nature of the case. The victims' young age, combined with the circumstances of their deaths, prompted him to designate it as a priority investigation. The initial evidence collection yielded several significant findings. Crime scene technicians discovered partial shoe prints matching industrial work boots, carpet fibers consistent with automotive interiors, and metal shavings later linked to welding work. The investigation of the Hart-Lester murders quickly focused on Jack Riley. Detective Richard Hawk assembled a case that appeared remarkably solid on the surface. The primary evidence centered on the Kroger surveillance footage, which showed Riley's Ford Taurus as the last known location where Amber Hart and Olivia Lester were seen alive. The timestamp marked 6:19 p.m. on September 14, 1995. His reputation preceded him. With 47 successfully prosecuted homicides over his 15-year career, his conviction rate stood at an impressive 94%. However, his methods would later come under scrutiny. His investigation tactics included extended interrogations, often lasting 12 to 16 hours, and what some would later describe as selective evidence collection. The physical evidence appeared damning. Crime scene technicians recovered metal shavings from the victim's clothing that matched industrial welding residue from the Ford plant. Fiber analysis showed matches between carpet samples from Riley's car and fibers found on the victims. A partial shoe print at the crime scene corresponded to the size and brand of work boots Riley wore at his job. Mary Riley, desperate to help her husband, took drastic measures. She sold their 1992 Ford Taurus for $4,500, liquidated her jewelry collection, including her wedding ring valued at $2,800, and withdrew their entire savings of $7,300. In total, she gathered $14,600 for legal representation. However, Jack steadfastly refused to use the money for a private attorney, maintaining his belief that the system would recognize his innocence without expensive legal assistance. This decision proved catastrophic. The court appointed Thomas Bennett, a public defender with only 18 months of experience and no previous homicide cases, to represent Riley. Bennett, overwhelmed by his existing caseload of 76 active cases, could dedicate only minimal time to Riley's defense preparation. Detective Hawk's investigation produced a steady stream of witnesses. A gas station attendant claimed to have seen Riley's car near the abandoned storage facility around 7:30 p.m. on the night of the murders. 3 workers from the Ford plant testified about Riley's unusual behavior in the days leading up to the crimes, though their statements would later be revealed as heavily guided by Detective Hawk's questioning techniques. The prosecution built its timeline meticulously. According to their theory, Riley picked up the girls at 6:19 p.m., drove them to the storage facility, committed the murders between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., and then returned home. Mary Riley's testimony that Jack arrived home later than usual that night, around 10:45 p.m. instead of his usual 6:30 p.m., inadvertently supported the prosecution's timeline. The district attorney offered Reith a plea bargain, 20 years instead of 30 if he confessed. Riley rejected 3 separate offers, insisting on his innocence. Each rejection was presented to the jury as evidence of his calculating character, with the prosecution arguing that only a guilty man would risk a life sentence if offered a lesser alternative. Detective Hawk's case appeared flawless. What wasn't revealed during the trial was the existence of similar unsolved cases in neighboring counties. 3 pairs of teenage girls murdered between 1992 and 1995, all with comparable circumstances. These cases were never connected to the Hart-Lester murders, and the evidence suggesting a pattern was never presented to the defense. The prosecution also withheld crucial information about their star witness, the gas station attendant, who had a history of providing testimony in other cases handled by Detective Hawk, always supporting the prosecution's theories. This pattern wouldn't be discovered until years later, during a review of Hawk's cases by the Innocence Project. In December 1995, the Michigan State Prison at Jackson became Jack Riley's new home. The transition from a free man to inmate number 247859 marked the beginning of 2 decades that would fundamentally transform him. His final visit with Mary, 1 month after his conviction, proved more devastating. "I can't live with a killer," Mary's words echoed through the visitor's room. Her face, once filled with love and trust, now showed only revulsion and fear. The woman who had stood beside him through 2 miscarriages and 8 years of marriage now sat across the table as a stranger. "I always thought I knew you," she whispered, removing her wedding ring with trembling fingers. "How could you? They were just children." Her last words hung in the air as she walked away, leaving Jack staring at the empty chair. The divorce papers arrived 11 months later, delivered to the prison's legal office. Jack signed them without reading, his signature mechanical and detached. Mary reverted to her maiden name, Thompson, and moved to Minnesota, severing all connections with their shared past. The only remnant of their life together that Jack kept was their wedding photograph, a snapshot of happier times that would gradually fade and wear over the next 20 years. Inside Jackson Prison, Riley underwent a methodical transformation. He established a rigid daily routine that would define his existence for the next 2 decades. Wake up at 5 a.m., 2 hours in the prison gym, pushing his body to its limits. The rest of the morning devoted to studying law books in the prison library. Afternoons spent working in the prison's metal shop, where his welding skills earned him a trusted position. By 2000, Riley had earned his GED and completed several legal correspondence courses. His cell transformed into a makeshift law office, walls covered with notes and case citations. He filed his own appeals, each one meticulously researched but ultimately denied. The system that he once trusted so completely now revealed itself as an impenetrable fortress of bureaucracy and indifference. Meanwhile, Detective Richard Hawk's career flourished. In 2003, he was promoted to head of the Violent Crimes Division. News clippings about Hawk's promotions and successful cases became part of Riley's collection. He tracked every detail of Hawk's career, noting patterns in his cases that others missed. The detective's conviction rate remained impressively high, but Riley began to see troubling similarities in how the cases were constructed. Physical transformation accompanied Riley's mental evolution. The once average welder developed a powerful physique through relentless exercise. Other inmates learned to avoid him, not because of violence, but because of his intense focus and unwavering routine. He spoke rarely, observed constantly, and never participated in prison politics or gangs. The wedding photograph remained his only personal possession, kept carefully preserved between the pages of his most used law book. The image of Mary in her white dress, smiling with hope and trust, served as both comfort and torment. It reminded him not only of what he'd lost, but of how the system had taken everything: his freedom, his wife, his future, and most importantly, his faith in justice. As years passed, Riley witnessed the world changing through occasional glimpses on prison television and in newspapers. DNA evidence began overturning convictions. The Innocence Project gained prominence. Technology advanced. Detective Hawk continued climbing the ranks, eventually becoming a respected figure in law enforcement circles across Michigan. Each development Riley observed and cataloged, building a mental archive of information that would eventually serve a purpose he hadn't yet fully formed. The man who entered Jackson Prison in 1995 believing in the system gradually transformed into someone else entirely, someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. Not because of violence or criminal associations, but because he had nothing left to lose and 20 years to plan his response to the injustice that had destroyed his life. On September 14, 2015, exactly 20 years after the fateful rainy evening that changed his life, Jack Riley walked through the gates of Jackson State Prison as a free man. At 54, his hair had turned completely gray. Deep lines etched into his face told the story of 2 decades behind bars. In his possession were only 3 items: a worn wedding photograph and 2 yellowed newspaper clippings showing the young faces of Amber Hart and Olivia Lester. The Innocence Project had begun investigating Riley's case in 2012, uncovering disturbing patterns in Detective Richard Hawk's investigative methods. Their findings revealed a systematic pattern of misconduct spanning multiple cases. Between 1992 and 1995, 3 similar cases emerged in neighboring counties. Paired teenage female victims, all supposedly solved by Hawk's investigations, all resulting in convictions based on circumstantial evidence. The project's investigation uncovered crucial DNA evidence that had never been presented at trial. Advanced testing methods, unavailable in 1995, revealed DNA profiles from the victim's clothing that didn't match Riley's. More significantly, these profiles showed similarities to evidence from the other paired teenage murders. Information that Detective Hawk had purposefully kept separate from Riley's case. Further investigation exposed the gas station attendant who testified against Riley had provided similar eyewitness testimony in 5 other cases Hawk investigated. Financial records showed suspicious deposits in the witness's bank account following each testimony. This pattern of paid testimony would have severely undermined the prosecution's case had it been known during the trial. During Riley's final year in prison, the investigation continued. Files obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed Hawk's investigation techniques consistently followed a troubling pattern. He would identify a suitable suspect early in the investigation, usually someone with limited resources or legal knowledge, then build a case backward, selecting and sometimes manipulating evidence to support his chosen narrative. On his release day, Riley refused the standard prisoner re-entry assistance. He had already memorized every detail about Richard Hawk's current life: his address in the affluent Bloomfield Hills suburb, his regular routines, the security systems protecting his home. The 3 photographs Riley carried represented the cost of a broken system: Mary's wedding photo showing the life and love he lost, and the newspaper photos of Amber Hart and Olivia Lester, 2 innocent lives cut short while their real killer remained free. These images had become more than memories. They were physical reminders of a justice system that had failed on every level. As Riley stood outside the prison gates, the world he entered was vastly different from the one he left in 1995. But some things remained unchanged. Richard Hawk still headed the Violent Crimes Division, still received commendations for his high conviction rates, and still employed the same techniques that had destroyed countless lives, including Riley's. On November 3, 2015, At approximately 11:45 p.m., Jack Riley executed a plan 20 years in the making. Richard Hawk's residence in Bloomfield Hills represented everything his career built on wrongful convictions had earned him. A $1.2 million house, equipped with state-of-the-art security systems, privacy gates, and motion sensors. However, Riley's years of studying security systems in the prison library proved invaluable. He disabled the alarm using techniques learned from fellow inmates who had worked in security installation. Hawk's home office reflected his professional pride. The walls displayed framed commendations, certificates, and newspaper articles chronicling his rise through law enforcement ranks. Among them hung a yellowed Detroit Free Press article from September 1995, headlined, "Truck Driver Arrested in Double-Teen Murder." The article featured Riley's booking photo, his younger self staring out from behind the glass frame. The office also contained files from his most celebrated cases. Hawk, now 63, had developed a habit of reviewing old cases late into the night, perhaps haunted by the decisions that built his career. That evening followed his usual pattern, working late, his service weapon secured in his desk drawer, a glass of bourbon on his desk. At 11:52 p.m., Riley entered the office. Riley methodically placed 3 photographs on Hawk's desk: the newspaper photos of Amber Hart and Olivia Lester, and a third image, crime scene photos from a similar double homicide in Oakland County from 1993, a case Hawk had deliberately kept separate from the Riley investigation. "You knew I was innocent," Riley stated, his voice steady. "You knew about the Oakland County cases. You knew about the DNA evidence that didn't match. You knew about the paid witnesses." Each statement landed like a physical blow. Hawk's hand moved toward his desk drawer, but 20 years of preparation had honed Riley's reflexes. The drawer remained closed. "Those girls deserved justice," Riley continued, producing additional crime scene photos from other similar murders. "Their families deserved the truth. Instead, you built your career on lies while the real killer continued his work." Hawk's face transformed from confusion to recognition. "Riley," he breathed, finally placing the face. "The statute of limitations on perjury has expired. Any evidence of misconduct is inadmissible now. You can't prove anything." "I'm not here to prove anything," Riley replied, his voice eerily calm. "I'm here to finish what the system failed to do." As Hawk lunged for his drawer, Riley moved with the efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this moment countless times. The single gunshot that followed barely registered above the ambient noise of the upscale neighborhood. At 12:01 a.m., November 4, 2015, Richard Hawk was pronounced dead in his home office. The responding officers found him slumped over his desk, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes: case files, photographs, and the truth he had suppressed for decades. Next to his body lay a detailed confession, written in his own hand under duress, documenting 20 years of systematic evidence manipulation and witness tampering. Jack Riley made no attempt to flee. He waited calmly in Hawk's office for the police to arrive, the murder weapon placed carefully on the desk before him. When officers entered, they found him sitting quietly, looking at the wall of commendations that represented 2 decades of corrupted justice. The investigation that followed would uncover the full extent of Hawk's misconduct, bringing into question dozens of convictions and ultimately leading to one of the largest case reviews in Michigan's criminal justice history. But for Jack Riley, none of that mattered anymore. The trial of Jack Riley versus the state of Michigan commenced on March 15, 2016, in the Wayne County Circuit Court. The same courtroom that had condemned him 20 years earlier now served as the stage for his final act of defiance against a system he once trusted. The gallery was filled beyond capacity, with national media outlets covering what had become known as the vigilante justice case. Lead defense attorney Sarah Martinez, appointed by the ACLU, presented a compelling case based on temporary insanity induced by wrongful imprisonment. She introduced extensive evidence of Detective Hawk's misconduct, uncovered through post-mortem investigations. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Collins, acknowledged Hawk's misconduct, but maintained that premeditated murder could not be justified, regardless of circumstances. The trial lasted 8 days. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of wrongful imprisonment. Former inmates exonerated through the Innocence Project's investigations of Hawk's cases provided testimony about similar patterns of evidence manipulation. The confession found beside Hawk's body detailed 23 wrongful convictions, including Riley's case and 12 other homicides where evidence had been deliberately suppressed. The jury's deliberation lasted merely 4 hours. At 2:15 p.m. on March 23, 2016, the foreman delivered the verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Judge William Harrison Williams prepared to announce the sentence. Known for his strict adherence to maximum sentencing guidelines, Williams had presided over hundreds of murder cases during his 15-year tenure. To everyone's surprise, Williams sentenced Riley to 15 years in a maximum security facility. The departure from the expected life sentence sparked immediate controversy. Legal experts would later point to this case as a landmark example of jury nullification's influence on judicial discretion. When granted his right to make a final statement, Riley rose slowly. The courtroom fell silent as he surveyed the familiar space where his life had been destroyed 2 decades earlier. 20 years ago, I stood in this very spot, proclaiming my innocence to deaf ears, Riley began, his voice steady and clear. The system operates in one direction only, crushing the innocent while protecting those who corrupt its principles. Detective Hawk didn't just take my freedom, my wife, my chance at fatherhood, and 20 years of my life. More importantly, he denied justice to Amber Hart and Olivia Lester. Riley paused, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. While I served time for a crime I didn't commit, their real killer remained free. My actions weren't about revenge. If that constitutes a crime, I accept my punishment. Unlike Hawk, I stand here guilty of exactly what I'm accused of. Dead silence enveloped the courtroom. Even Judge Williams, hardened by years on the bench, momentarily lowered his eyes. The impact of Riley's words resonated through the justice system, sparking investigations into hundreds of Hawk's cases and leading to the establishment of the Michigan Wrongful Conviction Review Board. As bailiffs led Riley away, reporters noted that he carried the same 3 photographs he'd held upon his release from prison: his wedding photo and the pictures of Amber Hart and Olivia Lester. These images, now symbolic of both personal loss and systemic failure, would become powerful symbols in the ongoing national debate about criminal justice reform. Riley's final words in that courtroom would echo through the halls of justice, forcing America to confront uncomfortable truths about its criminal justice system and the sometimes devastating price of blind faith in authority.